Just say it, man. Don't make me ask 20 questions.
What is the point?
Get to the point.
Just say it already!
Welcome to the Podcram. Check out what Dr. Matt Walker has to say about sleep, dreams, and learning in Part 6 of his 6-part special on Huberman Lab, aired May 8th, 2024.
When you are in REM sleep and you're dreaming, the next day you are better able to assimilate and associate memories and come up with these creative insight solutions. It turns out that sleep is necessary for that, and not just sleep, but dream-related sleep, REM sleep, is necessary for that, but it's not sufficient. You not only have to be asleep and dreaming to get those benefits, you also have to be dreaming of the very things that you are trying to solve the next day. There's a great study by a scientist called Robert Stickgold at Harvard, and he had a whole group of individuals learn a virtual maze, and they were dropped down in different locations of the maze, and they had to try to get out of the maze. And gradually, when you're dropped down in different locations, you do that enough times, you start to build up this mental map of the maze. And then he let one half of those participants take a 90-minute nap, and the other half remained awake. And then some hours later, they tested them on the maze, and they measured how quickly were you able to navigate and get out of the maze. That was the outcome measure. And sure enough, just as we described, those people who slept versus those who didn't, they were better able to navigate the maze after they had slept versus those who remained awake. But then they went back and they separated those individuals who were napping into two classes, because as they were napping, they were waking them up intermittently and getting dream reports from them. And what they found was that those people who slept and still had dream reports, but those dreams were not related to the maze, they didn't show an improvement. But those individuals who slept and who dreamt, but also dreamt of the specific maze elements themselves, they were the only subset of people, of participants, who showed the benefit. And that's a beautiful demonstration that, yes, you need to sleep to get creative benefits, and in fact, seemingly have dream sleep, but you also need to be dreaming about specific things. An additional memory-related research tool we've come up with in sleep science, and it's called TMR, or Targeted Memory Reactivation. And here's how it goes. I'm going to have you learn a set of associations. Have you ever played that card game? I think in America it's called Memory, which is very apt, where you get a deck of cards and it has two of the same item, 2 houses, 2 cars, 2 fire engines, 2 kettles, and you shuffle the cards and then you put them face down in a big square, in a big matrix. And over time, you have to turn over one card and it's a kettle. And then I'm just going to randomly pick another card and it's a fire engine. Okay. But gradually you start to learn where each one of the pairs are located. So what's clever about that is we would do that type of what's called a paired association memory test. You learn these paired associates, and then we test you after a night of sleep, and you're better. However, if as you're turning those items over, I play a congruent sound. So let's say you turn over the fire engine, and then when you turn over the other fire engine, I'm going to start playing a fire engine noise in the background. So I'm bonding the association of the memory card pairs with this tone, with this congruent sound. And then a kettle, I turn over a kettle, I turn over the other kettle, and it's whistling. And then when you let people sleep at night, if you start replaying those same tones at a sub-awakening threshold, so you're not waking people up, and you bring them back, and let's say that you only do those sound cue reactivations for half of the memories that you've done, and the other half you leave untouched. So within an individual, you have a unique within individual control. You test them on the things that you didn't reactivate at night and those that you did. It's almost like creating a bespoke playlist at night where you say, look, I learned all of this information during the day, or wouldn't this be wonderful? And then here's the stuff that I really think, personally to me, I want to remember. Well, it turns out I'd been tagging that with particular music. And then at night, I replay that music. And the next day, it turns out that those things I reactivated are much more strongly consolidated by way of sleep than those things I didn't. So that's the basic method of what we call TMR, targeted memory reactivation.
Am I right in recalling that this paired association way of bringing about certain memories or strengthening certain memories in sleep can also be accomplished with odors? That it's not just the playing of tones during specific experiences, but also, for instance, if one were to pair a particular odor with a certain novel memory event in the daytime or attempt to learn something new, that if that odor is then infused into the room of the sleeping person later that night, that somehow the memories would be strengthened. Do I have that correct?
There's nothing wrong. I've said it before, I'll say it again. There's nothing wrong with your memory. That was one of the seminal papers that started this whole movement. And what they did was they had them learn this kind of paired associate card test. But they were wearing this mask, almost looks like a fighter pilot mask. And they were either puffing up inert air that didn't smell at all, or they were perfusing this very pleasant rose scent. I think everyone has had this experience where you bond a certain cologne or a certain perfume with a particular individual. So they were puffing the rose perfume up the nose of these participants. And then when they went into sleep, they started to reperfuse that rose odor. So it's not just enough to have rose odor at night. You need to have made the initial bonded familiar connection with the novel information that you're learning to get the subsequent targeted memory reactivation benefit. And you could then think, well, practical tools, what should I do? Maybe, when I'm studying for a test, I should blaze up my most preferred incense. And I have a particular proclivity to green tea incense, it turns out. And maybe then, before I go to bed at night, I get a couple of sticks and I, blaze them back up, tuck my head on the pillow, turn the light out. However, do not do that because it's probably a desperate fire hazard. So do not listen to me. But you could think about doing something along those lines, perhaps. Anyway, so that's targeted memory reactivation.
The awareness that we are dreaming while in a dream, can we train ourselves to lucid dream?
I think the better one, maybe the more effective one, is called the reality testing method. And it was probably made famous in a brilliant movie. If you haven't seen it, everyone should watch it. It's called Waking Life. And it is an amazing, Richard Linklater, the director. Just for the philosophy alone in it, it will blow your mind. It's exceptional, but it's a beautiful treatise on dreaming and lucid dreaming. And in that, they describe a method where during the waking day, you are constantly, perhaps you can set an alarm, and you're constantly reminded to go over to, let's say, the wall and flip the light switch on and off, on and off, on and off. And sure enough, what happens? The lights go on and off. Why? Because it's the real world, and it complies and it's complicit with the laws of physics. So you do this time and time again, and you start to train yourself that at unique moments throughout your waking experience, you always go over and you test some version of reality. Or it could just be, I'm going to press my hand into something solid, and this table is resisting my hand right now as I'm pressing it. And I just keep doing that. And then at some point, it becomes routine enough that you start to do that same thing when you are dreaming. But now, when I press my hand against the table or press my hand against the wall, my hand goes straight through the wall. Or I flip the light switch on and off, and the lights do nothing. And all of a sudden, that's my cue to say, I'm not awake, am I? I'm dreaming. And therefore, at that point, I gain lucidity, and it increases the probability.
Can we bank sleep or catch up on lost sleep?
It's a great question. You can and you cannot bank sleep. And it is directional. So what we found is that for certain things, such as, let's say, an immune vaccination or learning and memory, if you are sleep deprived, let's say the night after learning a specific task, and lots of people have done this. So you are deprived the first night after learning, and that first night we know is critical for consolidating and saving those memories. But then the next day, I don't test you in the way I would normally do. Instead, I give you a full recovery night of sleep. Or maybe I give you 2 full recovery nights of sleep, and then I test you. Do you show any evidence of a memory consolidation benefit? And the answer is no, you don't. In other words, if you don't sleep the first night after learning, you lose the chance to consolidate those memories. So there, sleep in that sense is an all or nothing phenomenon. If you don't snooze, you lose in that regard. And there are other examples of that downstairs in the body. That is what happens when you go into a debt and then you try to pay it back with later credit and it fails. You can't seem to do that with sleep. So in that sense, sleep is not like the bank in that direction. You can't accumulate a debt and then, let's say at the weekend, after short sleeping during the week, see if you can pay off that debt at some later point in time. It doesn't work like that. So for example, if I deprive you, Andrew Huberman, of sleep tonight, let's say it's an 8-hour opportunity, and then tomorrow I give you all of the recovery sleep that you want, and then on a second night, third night, fourth night, do you sleep longer those subsequent nights? Yes, you do. But you only sleep back about 50%, about 4 extra hours. In fact, if you look at the data, it's usually less. It's usually around 2, so only about 25% of the 8 hours that you lost. So you are always running a debt. And if that's the case, if you can't truly pay back your sleep debt and you're constantly running that short sleep cycle, it's like compounding interest on a loan. It just escalates dramatically. And that's why I think we see that short sleep really does predict ill health outcomes and more an early mortality the later and later in life that you go. However, there is a different form of sleep banking. I told you that here you're going into a debt and you're trying to pay it off with credit later. What if you had the inverse? Let's say that you are a doctor or a nurse, or you are working in the emergency services, and you know that you have 2 nights where you're on nights and you're going to be probably very busy and you're not going to be sleeping well for the next 2 nights. And that's going to be next Monday and Tuesday. And I'm currently on Wednesday in the week prior. There is something that has been demonstrated called sleep banking, which is where I know I'm going to go into debt, so I sleep longer and I create credit to begin with, and then I spend that credit as I go into debt, and it seems to lessen the impact of that debt. It doesn't remove the impact entirely, but it does lessen it. So here it's the inverse. I'm not going into debt and then trying to pay it off later. I build up credit, and then I can spend that credit with debt. So there is a form of sleep banking that seems to be present, but it's not the sleep banking that most people think about. Does that make, I know it's very confusing, but I tried to be clear about that.
I think you made it very clear that you can buffer some of the sleep loss that you anticipate, but there's no retroactive saving of what you lost.
That's right.
Thanks for listening to this installment of The Podcram. I hope it contains something useful for you. If you enjoy these selections and are curious about the curator's own thoughts, you can check out my other podcast, Psychic Lube, where I share concise concepts meant to grease the intellectual gears and help get your creative juices flowing. Each episode is an ongoing collaborative project that welcomes listeners to expand or rebut its points by email or comment, the most interesting of which get incorporated through periodic re-recordings. As always, if you're intrigued by today's content, I encourage you to go listen to the full podcast in its original form directly from its creators so that their sponsors keep paying them to make stuff for us and nobody feels compelled to sue me for copyright infringement. Now, get off your phone and go do smart stuff. Have a productive day.